Namaste, good morning and good afternoon. Very warm welcome to you all to this opening plenary session for EU-SAARC Think Tank Summit. This is a joint initiative of Asian Institute of Diplomacy and International Affairs, foreign policy-based think tank located in Kathmandu, and South Asia Democratic Forum, SADF, think tank based in Brussels. Let me first briefly introduce our distinguished speakers of this opening plenary session. We have Dr. Erner Hasselband, sir, who is the president of Austrian Institute of European and Security Policy, and also the former defense minister of Austria. And we have Dr. Arvind Gupta, sir, director of Vivekananda International Foundation, New Delhi, India. Similarly, we have Malago Jata Bonikowska, madam, who is the president of Center for International Relations, CSM Poland. Similarly, we have Dr. Bishnuraj Upati, sir, executive chairman, Policy Research Institute, PRI Nepal, and with us Paulo Casaca, sir, executive director of South Asia Democratic Forum, SADF Brussels. So before the welcome remarks and thoughts from the Paulo, sir, let me just briefly set the tone for this discussion. Okay, so I think with the theme of advancing EU-SAARC cooperation during this two-day summit, we have around 25 speakers representing more than 15 countries from both the region. We're going to discourse on some key interregional issues, trends, and opportunities. And with these discourses on the different thematic session, this year's summit aims to contribute in deepening the interregional economic ties, understanding increasing economic and strategic significance in the South Asia, especially in the context of changing global power order. And in this backdrop, we also aims to scrutinize the regional strategies of EU in South Asia. And correspondingly, this summit also aims to contribute in comprehending the current scenario and underlying impediments of regional integration in EU and SAARC. And similarly, the advancing the strong cooperation for effectively responding the common non-traditional security threats. We know that humankind is dealing with some unprecedented challenges like climate change, migration, not to mention the ongoing greatest political crisis resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think most importantly, furthering constructive cooperation and dialogue among the think tanks in EU and South Asia is the prime motives, which ultimately contribute in advancing the interregional ties. As an institution, I'd always believe that the best way to produce the valuable policy recommendations is to maximize our collaborative efforts by contributing from the respective expertise that we have. So we have been always trying to expand our partnership, and for this today's summit, it is our true pleasure to collaborate with the SADF, one of the premier institutions with its prime focus on promoting EU and South Asia relations. So I think with this, I'd like to request Paulo Casaca, sir, for the welcome remarks and his thoughts forward. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Shyam, for this introduction. I would like to welcome all of you, wherever you are, wherever you are working at, for this first European South Asia Association for Regional Cooperation Summit of think tanks. I would like to congratulate and thank our partners in this initiative, the Asian Institute for Diplomacy and International Affairs, with which we already have quite a long cooperative history, for both the idea and the organizational efforts, and Dr. Siegfried Wolf, who worked on the project as a representative of the South Asia Democratic Forum. This year's summit will consist of 4 panels, 2 more general in the beginning and in the end, and 2 more specific, dedicated to regional cooperation and to the European strategy in South Asia. We would like first to thank Ambassador of the European Union to Nepal, Mrs. Nona Depres, and the Ambassador of the European Union to India and Bhutan, Mr. Hugo Astuto, for their presence. This year, we have with us such distinguished think tanks, research centers, and universities as the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, the Vivekananda International Foundation, the Center for Social and Economic Progress, the Asian Confluence, Gateway House, and the University of Delhi, all from India. We also have among us the Policy Research Institute from Nepal, the Pakistan Institute of International Affairs, the Bangladesh Institute of Development Studies, the King's College of London, the University of Catania, the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, the Center for International Relations, and the University of Warsaw from Poland. The German Institute for International and Security Affairs, the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and the Center for European Policy Studies from Belgium. We are thankful for such diversified and wide-ranging cooperation. Regional cooperation as a program lied in the origin of the South Asia Democratic Forum 10 years ago. Two remarkable studies developed both in Bangladesh and Nepal demonstrated how popular the topic is in both these countries, which may indeed be considered as those most enthusiastic on them. Since then, we developed our awareness of the challenges involved in this inter-regional cooperation, as well as the need to build on the European experience of change through small and concrete steps. We are looking forward to learning as much as possible from the present summit. Our summit will also focus on the India-European Union Strategic Partnership, an endeavor we think is the most promising in fostering our common values of a free, democratic, and developed world. To this endeavor, we wish the utmost success. Our concluding panel will address momentous issues regarding water, energy, and food, which cannot be separated from the social and environmental comprehensive visions that our common challenges demand. I am deeply convinced we need reforms on these areas. However, reform can only emerge from a balanced and participative debate regarding our common future. I hope we are witnessing but the beginning of the wide-ranging reflections demanded, and that this upcoming year will witness concrete proposals and ways to forward our goals. In the name of the organizers of the present summit, we wish you a fruitful and enlightening participation. Thank you so much, and let's go for our first panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paulo, sir, for summarizing the what this summit is all about. Thank you very much. So now I think without further ado, I would like to request our highly distinguished speakers in this panel for their remarks. Broadly, I think we anticipate your thoughts on two major areas. First, the significance of the meaningful partnership and regular dialogues for advancing the cooperation between two regional blocs. And second, what are some fundamental emerging issues and daunting challenges that you think faced by both regions, and how and why it is important to have strong collaborations for dealing with them. Without any interruptions, we'll hear one after another interventions from our speakers. Meantime, I also like to request our respected participants participated in these sessions to share their questions by chat box of this Zoom platform. So may I start with Dr. Werner Hasselbaum, sir? Sir, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to thank all of you for this invitation. As I said, of course, it would have been even a big and greater pleasure to do it in Kathmandu and looking at the snowy mountains from Kathmandu. But of course, due to COVID-19 crisis, we will take part this way, and I think it should be not less interesting. When we are looking to this cooperation between South Asian and European think tanks, what is the basis? What is the need for that? And I would say we can find, from my point of view, specifically two phenomena that are changing the world. The one is globalization as such, and the second is the rise of China in the last decades. And these two phenomena will mean that everybody, every region and every global actor has to define, newly has to redefine its own role. And this is the process we are in. And of course, the question where we are living, where we are situated, is of major importance. What do I mean? In the last decades, the Indo-Pacific area has become the most central region of the world, and it will even develop this role more and more. What do I mean? In antique times, in the antique periods, it used to be the Mediterranean between Europe and Africa. In modern times, it has become the Atlantic between Europe and America. And in the 21st century, it has become the Indo-Pacific area due to the rise of population, of importance, of developments, and so on. And of course, you also are living in a region that where you find in immediate neighborhood two of the already existing or specifically also future giants of world politics, China on the one hand and India at the other hand. And so far, everybody, not only within the region, has to define its own role, but it certainly is also important to have a view from outside, because you probably will be much better in shape just to analyze your own situation if you compare it with others, and if you get an independent view from the outside. And this is the major reason for me, that we should try to have this exchange of ideas between South Asia on the one hand and Europe at the other hand. We can give you quite something from out of our experience of integration in the last decades. This is one thing. And on the other hand, of course, you have a specific experience also in between India and China and living with those two giants more or less next door. And insofar, this exchange will be a benefit for both sides. That's what I see. So what do we have to discuss in this question of regional integration and the question of regional development? I would say the main question certainly will be, what should be the future structure? What should be the future order in order to make every region a future actor in the world, whether this is Europe or whether this is South Asia? Every region has its very specific modalities, its very specific circumstances, and has to define its role. And what we do have in common is that we have a structure of states consisting out of, quite a number of states, of different sizes. And what we have to find, something more or less a new stage that brings them not only together within the region, but also is in conformity with the interests of the big states and the small states. And of course, I can say it coming from a small state. Austria is a little bit more than half the size of Nepal, and only 1/3 of the inhabitants around about, and so far we do have quite some experience in handling the process between smaller and bigger states. And one of my major experiences is that you never shall forget the importance of neighborhood. What do I mean? I very often cite the example of Austrian exports. We have 5 small neighbors, Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, and Switzerland, together around about 35 million people. But those 5 nations, small nations, have a bigger importance for Austria's exports than the 5 biggest nations like America, China, Russia, India, and Japan together, although their size is around about 100 times as big as our small neighbors. And the lesson is, that neighborhood is of utmost importance. This is one thing. And at the other side, that you only will be able to influence also the global development if you stick together, if also the smaller countries can sit at the table, can participate in the development, and on the other side also develop their niche strategies. That's what I see. And with this, I already want to end. Therefore, I'm convinced that it is absolutely necessary to have this exchange of ideas, exchange of experiences, and of course also this exchange of visions. Because if you want to change the world, and if you want also to change your own role as a state or as a region, you also have to develop some visions and some strategies. And in this process, I think Europe and South Asia do have so much in common that we really should do it more extensively than in the past. This is one of the most challenging agendas we do have, both sides, I guess, and therefore we should work on it intensively. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your valuable remarks. Maybe I'm not going to summarize what you have already said, but one thing that I like very much about is like how small states should manage its relations with the powerful countries. So many countries from the Europe and South Asia can share their experience in order to manage their relations effectively with the big powers. That is what I think we need to have a kind of pragmatic approach to deal with them. So I think that is one of the greatest takeaways personally I like. Thank you very much, sir. Now I'd like to request Dr. Arvind sir for your remarks.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please.
Okay. Thank you, Shyamji, for inviting me to this summit and my fellow co-panelists. I think the idea of exchanges between think tanks is very important, and there is a lot of experience of the last couple of decades at least that I have been dealing with think tanks from different capacities. So I can vouchsafe that these exchanges are very important. In my remarks, I want to focus on 2 issues. One is the shifting landscape, geopolitical landscape, which gives rise to some ideas for collaboration, future collaboration. And secondly, also the nature of our think tanks and the kind of interaction that we have had in the past, whether that requires some change. So these are the 2 issues that I will focus on. So, Mr. Werner mentioned, the political, economic, and geopolitical landscape is shifting. New power equations are emerging, and COVID-19 has only accelerated some of the changes which are already there in the world for the last couple of decades. And China's rise has certainly caused a major turbulence across the world. And now we have a Trump administration, which is gone now, and Biden-Harris team is taking over. And I think this will be a very important moment. Biden-Harris team has the declared tasks are to overcome the divisions of the US society, address the concerns of the middle classes, overcome COVID, and repair the alliance system, and restore the US preeminence in the world, which was affected during the Trump administration. How will the US deal with China is going to be a key question for the emerging world order. We already have strategic competition which is unfolding, and sometimes it seems as if a new Cold War is perhaps opening out. So I think this is a new area for investigation for the think tanks. It's also interesting to see that the COVID-19 has seemed to indicate that the countries where democracy is strong, freedom, human rights, etc., these values are strong, they are not necessarily the ones which have done well. On the other hand, authoritarian countries have seemed to have done better. At least some people say that. So there is this cherished ideals of democracy, freedom, human rights are under challenge, and authoritarian tendencies are re-emerging. And it's a very interesting thing. In the last few weeks, the EU has signed an investment agreement with China, and it has raised questions whether values are more important than valuations. In the era of globalization and economic interdependence, interests of business houses and corporates seem to get priority over democracy and human rights. So this is the kind of a situation that is emerging. Since we are talking about Europe and South Asia, we can see that Europe is in ferment. The migration crisis, which started a few years ago, has given rise to right-wing tendencies in several parts of Europe. Brexit has dented the European community. China has made deep inroads into Europe, and there are divisions within Europe also as to how to deal with China. And I think Europe seems to be looking for a strategy to deal with China in a proper way. Now there will be a leadership change in Germany, which is a big moment. There could be policy changes in Germany. But what seems to us sitting here is that there is a lack of clarity in Europe itself as to what is Europe's place in the world, as the transatlantic alliance seems to have frayed, and NATO is looking to remake itself. So this kind of a situation will have a global impact, regional impact, and also impact on South Asia. We're also seeing that in this era of hyper-globalization, income inequalities have increased, regional disparities have increased and become more acute. The environment seems to have suffered. The threat of climate change to mankind is growing and becoming bigger. And despite the Paris Climate Change Agreement, there doesn't seem to be any easy solution to the climate change problems. And here the countries in the developing world, particularly in South Asia, are which have not achieved the developmental levels that they should have achieved. Now they are coming under pressure due to climate change to make certain compromises with their growth, etc. At the same time, terrorism and radicalization remain very potent, and as forces of destabilization. And we have seen how France has undergone terrorist attacks, and the situation is the international community has not really succeeded in dealing with the terrorism. Multilateralism is under great stress. Multilateral institutions are under great stress. Regional institutions have acquired greater salience, but their agendas are narrowly focused. Going forward, we see a lot of uncertainty, and policymakers are challenged to understand the scale and depth of change that is sweeping the world. And policy making is becoming increasingly nationalist, and COVID has intensified that tendency. So, as think tanks, both in Europe and South Asia, I think several new issues have arisen, and we need to focus on them. And exchanges between our think tanks will certainly help. Now, let me say a few words about the think tanks, particularly the interaction between the European think tanks and the South Asian think tanks, say, over the last couple of decades. Now, think tanks are playing increasingly important role in providing information, analysis, advocacy, capacity building, bridge building, policy advice to the policymakers, and even educating the public as well. And some of the think tanks also play as the role of interlocutors in conflict resolution. They also provide channels of communication and very useful platforms for discussion. So these are some of the pluses of our think tanks. Our think tanks are not necessarily neutral. They are agenda driven. They receive funding from a variety of sources. Some of them are shrouded in secrecy, some of these sources. Thus, transparency sometimes in the working of think tanks has become an important issue. Funding, human and technological resources remain a problem for many think tanks, particularly in South Asia. The funding of think tanks is an important determinant of a think tank's character. Foreign funding is always problematic. There has been considerable research on how foreign governments sometimes or agencies sometimes use think tanks to buy influence in the target countries. So these kind of issues do occur in a think tank's working. Europe and South Asia have many think tanks. Over the years, their numbers have grown, their interactions have grown. Useful reports have been produced, and some were mentioned just in the opening remarks. These think tanks have also provided a platform for discussions and exchange, and even political leaders have and policymakers have engaged with these think tanks. But there are some specific features which I think we need to take into account. We find quite often that the relationship between the think tanks, European and South Asian, is asymmetric. European think tanks have more resources as compared to South Asian counterparts. This gives a certain orientation to discussions and debates. The agenda setting initiatives usually come from think tanks which provide resources, and these think tanks are quite often run by political parties or other interest groups. The think tanks, the agendas are set in accordance with the priorities of the funding institutions. The issues which matter for the think tanks, for South Asian think tanks, do not always get the necessary emphasis in the discussion and debates. It has been seen that since many of these think tanks are funded by agencies in Europe about whom we really don't know very much about. And we also find that very often European think tanks are interested in issues which are domestic to the South Asian countries. Large amount of discussion takes place, such as development, human rights, the political dynamic in South Asia, environment in South Asia, labor standards, communal situation, and so on and so forth. And these reports naturally look into those. So sometimes these creates controversies in South Asian countries. In contrast, we find that the South Asian scholars have little access or even interest in issues which are European, but which may have impact on or relevance to the South Asian working. In other words, it's really the research about South Asia which is given priority, but much less about what the Europeans themselves think. I think this asymmetry needs to be remedied. So my brief recommendations are that South Asian think tanks should reduce their reliance on foreign funding and generate their own funding and come up with their own agendas. And European think tanks should bring European issues also for joint research, because these are also very useful for us to know. And there should be a greater focus on economic and technological issues. And we should go beyond the traditional agendas which have dominated the interaction between the South Asian and the European think tanks. So thank you very much.
Uh, Thank you. Thank you, all Minister, for your remarks. I think you touched upon the changing geopolitical dynamic of the globe, and as well as the nature of think tank, with the special emphasis on the relations between the maintaining resource integrity and then the relations with the funding. So how funding can affect the maintaining the resource integrity that think tanks are producing. So now I'd like to request Dr. Malgojata, Madam, for your remarks.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on this panel. First of all, my name is very simple, actually. It's Margaret. It's like Margaret, but you can call me also Gogo. It's my nickname, so it's not so difficult as everybody thinks. First of all, I want to say a few words about the Center for International Relations I represent. We are the oldest Polish independent think tank which specializes in foreign affairs. We are based in Poland, meaning Central Eastern Europe. So it means that we are one of those very few think tanks from Central Eastern Europe engaged in the discussion, in the dialogue between Europe and Asia. Because normally when we say Europe-Asia or European Union and Southeast Asia, we have basically the majority of interest and scholars and think tanks come from the Western Europe, by tradition, by many reasons. So I think that's one of the important things to bring, that also in our region, it's really a high interest now in Asia, especially in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and of course, China. And I want also to tell you a few words about that. I myself, I'm a political scientist. I've done European studies and I cover regularly the EU affairs. So I'm not Orientalist. My personal perception of developments in South Asia comes from the EU perspective. But I am very, very happy that we can have this discussion during the Portuguese presidency in the European Union, especially for Paulo, coming from Portugal. So it's a very good occasion to also bring, a perspective of Central Eastern Europe to the table. And I think under the Portuguese presidency, it is very easy to do. Well, following our topic of the panel, I want to first say that, of course, we see the think tank cooperation and generally, in a larger sense, the academic cooperation as a part of connectivity. Connectivity is the word we use to describe one of the very important angles of relations between Asia and Europe. But I think it has to be understood in a very wide sense. It's not only physical, territorial connectivity, meaning infrastructure, but it's also people-to-people connectivity. And also it's a connectivity of brains. So thinking, ideas, circulations of, the approaches, it should be a part of this word, connectivity. Second point is, you mentioned that Europe is also kind of going under a lot of changes, and especially European Union, which is true. And we always have to understand that as far as, the continents, European Union is, of course, not the whole Europe. We have 48 countries in Europe. We have 27 countries in the European Union. So European Union is now going under a time of reflection. I think we have a lot of internal issues, some of these issues you've mentioned, but of course, the reflection on what is European Union, what is the role of the European Union also elsewhere, basically in Southeast Asia, it has to be connected with this reflection, what is European Union for us, Europeans as well, and what should be the future of this project. For our Asian colleagues, I just want to stress that European Union is really very different than everything else. It's a unique concept of an organization which is much more than an organization, much more than international organization, but it's still not a state. It's still not a state. So it was a concept which evolved, and in every generation, we have maybe a different understanding of how to build its future and what is this organization for. Because of course, the 27 member states are independent states, and they also use this organization for their own purposes. So the states' interests play a huge role in the discussion about what is European Union. And of course, the internal national politics in every single member state influences very much the European thinking, the thinking at the level of the European Union. I want to stress that unlike Indian Union, it's not a state, so we don't have really European politics. We have politics which happen really at the level of nation states, which can be seen also as a weakness of European Union in times of such many changes and in times of such a bad environment, bad political environment. European Union was invented as European communities in a very, very different time. So it is true that we Europeans are very much also focused on our own internal matters. And we have also factors like you mentioned Brexit, you mentioned migration crisis, which happened the peak in 2015-16. You mentioned economic crisis earlier. Now we have pandemic. So we can say that at least during the last decade, European Union is going from crisis to crisis. It's like a crisis management, which is not maybe the best time to reflect and to think about strategic approach because there are so many issues on our plate. However, the relations with Asia generally and with China, what you mentioned, I think can help us also to build really a perception of ourselves. And this US-China rivalry, which we are now facing, it's also a challenge for the European Union to position ourselves. And you mentioned EU-China agreement, controversial. Of course, that's one of the elements of this reflection. What should be the European approach to the US-China tensions? And of course, Europe doesn't want to be just a viewer of the international politics. European Union wants to be an active player and wants to be an agenda setter. So for us, if the world goes towards bilateral, bipolar divisions, it's not really the world we want to have. We are very strongly for the multilateral world, and we will do everything possible to keep Europe in this game as a major player. But it's not an easy thing to do because we are not a state. We are a group of states with a lot of internal issues. Then, the third point I want to make is about European Union and Central Eastern Europe. Just to stress that European Union itself has changed because of the enlargement. And it's not anymore this group of 12 or 15 countries of the West, North, and South, but there are these countries who joined in 2004 and 2007 and 2013. So we have 27 countries now, but Central Eastern European countries are also in the game, meaning that our perception, it's not only about Poland. Poland is, maybe the biggest country of the region, but in every single country now, there is much more interest for other continents than it used to be earlier, because we have in the EU the difference of approaches. Central Eastern Europe was having different history and different problems than the West. We had communism. We were a part of a Soviet bloc, by the way, which is very well known in India, because I think still many people perceive Central Eastern Europe more from this Russian angle instead of perceiving it as a part of the West. So this is one question, the perception, and the perception matters because the perception builds our mental maps and builds the mental maps of the leaders as well. So we have both these mental maps in Asia and in Western Europe, that the dialogue concentrates on these angles, West and Southeast Asia. So the perception of Central Eastern European scholars and academic and politicians as well is that we should be in to this discussion and we should bring our understanding of the topics, of the of the issues, of also the approaches to the to this dialogue. And upon point number 4, I am giving you an example of it, because when we talk about Indo-Pacific in the dialogue between Europe and Asia, Central Eastern European countries always remember that we have two other concepts, two other ideas put on the table. We have Eurasia, which is a concept very much promoted by Russia. And of course, for Central Eastern Europe, Russia remains the key player and also the key threat, which is not necessarily the case in the Western Europe. I would even say there are some countries in Western Europe who see Russia more as a potential partner. And also the intelligentsia, the elites of the Western countries, such as Italy, much about Portugal, but they are very much into dialogue with Russia. And there are a lot of positive images of Russia and positive energy towards relations with Russia. The same thing we may see even in India, because your relations, Indian-Russian relations, they were quite close and they remain even today an important part of Indian foreign policy. I want to stress that Central Eastern Europe definitely sees Russia in a different perspective. And Eurasia concept we see as an alternative promoted by Russia against the concept of European Union, and also as another narrative which is proposed to Asian countries, especially Central Asia, against the concepts of Indo-Pacific and also of the concept of one belt, one road, which is a third narrative to describe the situation in Asia or the connectivity between Europe and Asia. So once we discuss Indo-Pacific, I think we should also discuss the other two, Eurasia and one belt, one road, and the future of these concepts, because there is a connectivity between them. And the final word goes to the think tanks cooperation itself. You mentioned different challenges that think tanks face, financial, dependencies, Of course, I have to confirm that in Central Eastern Europe, think tanks are much weaker than in the West. They are not so well established like in Western Europe, but they are stronger and stronger. So I think we can share also the very practical comments on how the think tanks could work and how to be able to have an impact on a public discussion and impact on the political developments in our respective countries, while we have no stability as far as financial situation or even, from the point of view of perception, we are not so strong. But it does not mean that the think tanks in our part of the world don't have impact. They do, but it's a huge challenge. So maybe we could discuss how, in what formats, and how we could create our cooperation in order to make our role stronger. That's all from my side as an introduction.
Thank you. Thank you very much, madam, for your very valuable deliberations. Being a graduate from the Warsaw University and living over there for almost 1 year, it is like somehow uneasy from my side to not to not being like able to pronounce correctly your name. So excuse me for that. Now I would like to request Dr. Vishnu sir for your remarks. Vishnu sir.
Thank you, Shamji. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear all fellow panelists. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizer for giving the space to share our perspective. It was quite timely and relevant topics you choose. Very quickly, I will introduce Policy Research Institute. It is a government-created, government-funded think tank to support the government of Nepal in its policies. So it has a quite huge mandate, very ambitious scope, and it was created recently, just 2 years ago. So we have quite a huge mandate, and now we are in the formative stage. That is very quick introduction, what you will know about that. And Policy Research Institute is quite open to collaborate in different forms with any of the partners, and we have to learn a lot. So what I am bringing to this forum to discuss, to debate, is some of my experiences. 20 years or more, I work as the manager, leader of the collaboration with different universities, think tank and research institute, work in Europe and South Asia. And so based on my 20 years of experience on working with the think tank and its operation, modality, scope, risks, challenges, and opportunity, I will quickly highlight some of the lessons we learn, and we have to learn, and we have to de-learn. And then I will also present few of the gaps, and then some opportunities and possible risk and conclusion. So within 10 or 12 minutes, I will share my reflection, basically going beyond the Policy Research Institute, because this is new, but I have quite huge engagement working with different think tanks in Europe and South Asia. So first and foremost, condition for successful cooperation between the think tank or other collaboration is the mutual trust and mutual interest. Without mutual interest and mutual trust, if we are talking about the regional cooperation between the two regions, it may not work. It works, but it will be one-sided, compartmentalized. So wherever we want to start the collaboration, either issue-wise or project-wise or whatever it is, the first and foremost is the mutual trust and mutual respect and the mutual interest, setting agenda together. For example, if we want to look to the broader impact of the changing geopolitics in the globe, and if more than 5, 6 institutions want to work together as a consortium to have the bigger impact, we have to have the common interest and commitment. So that is one. The second I realize is the meaningful engagement and debate and discussion. Without that, the trust will not build, confidence will not develop, and therefore that is quite important. The third important I realize is if we are talking about the more formalized type of the collaboration to do any analysis, bigger analysis, or to have the project or loose cooperation, at least role and responsibility, how the different think tank can work together. For example, the trend is that what will be the impact of the Brexit to the European countries and European Union? Is it necessary that always the European has to look on that? Why not South Asian? If the South Asian have to engage in that, so there will be some sort of mutual learning and collaboration. That is quite important for me. And also important is to invest the capacity development. What I realize, the capacity doesn't mean that it is a financial one, it is the institutional one. It's also the ability to understand. Majority of the European scholar coming to analyze the South Asia, Arvind was very rightly saying earlier that they come and make pick one point of the cultural differences of the diversity and make generalize, and then it really misrepresent, and it doesn't help much, but it creates a tension. So the capacity to understand by the European or by the South Asian, first and foremost, is also to develop the capacity to analyze, to understand, and to at least develop the holistic understanding. For that, for me, is also again the meaningful engagement, interaction, sharing, etc. So these are some of the learning I have developed from 20 years. The another important learning is also the sharing the outcome. For example, what I see in most of the time when there is a collaboration between the two region or two research institute or two researcher, the data, collection of data, presenting data, all that goes to the southern researcher or the collaborator, and the publication comes in the first name of the northern researcher. That is not really sharing of the proper benefit. So these are some of the lessons, because we are facing the new challenges. Arvind and all of you, the previous speakers, very clearly refer that we are entering to an entirely new and most potentially uncertain future, and for that we have to have some sort of concerted action, and for the concerted action we need the collaboration and collaborative efforts to bring the more amicable solutions, that solution to be owned by the countries, by the state, and for that again there is no chances without collaboration. If the Belgian or German or British or whoever the think tank comes and do some work in South Asia, in India or Nepal or Bhutan or Pakistan, wherever, and makes the recommendation that it has to go, it will not work. It may work partially, but it will not work until and unless the collaboration with the host country, collaboration and commitment, engagement of the host country, this type of the think tank initiative may not work. So my proposition here for the debate, it's a bit provocative, but let's develop any sort of collaboration and cooperation based on the mutual respect and mutual interest. In the learning, that is what I want to share with you. Regarding the gaps, what I see, there are 3 or 4 gaps very clearly we see. The gaps in terms of understanding or knowledge, not necessarily Southern have no knowledge and the Northern have more knowledge, but the contextualized knowledge or context-specific knowledge, both North and South have the real gap. Because as I referred earlier also, taking few of the small specific cases and generalize it, and based on that recommending to the European Union that the European Union should deal in that way with the Bhutan or Pakistan or Nepal or India, it doesn't work. So the knowledge gap and understanding gap is huge, because the indigenous knowledge, indigenous experiences, the indigenous uniqueness of South Asia is quite far richer than Europe, and therefore proper understanding is needed, and there is a very clear gap. The second gap, what I realize, is also the commitment gap. You see, I work on the behalf of the European think tank in the region, and also work with the South Asian think tank with the northern collaborator, what I see there is not real commitment. It's more the piecemeal basis, project-wise, and if some comes, if they need some partner to collect the difficult data or to access them to the power centers to get, that's all. It doesn't work. So this is basically doesn't develop the trust, and the European, South Asian, all of us needs to rethink how we can really rebuild our relations based on the mutual respect and trust, and then the very right beginning of the collaboration starts there. In many cases, I didn't see that. At least in my 21 years of experience working in that, only in occasional basis it is happening. Always there is a, sorry, there is some ambulance. Yeah. Occasionally, there is some sort of collaboration, mutual respect, and that develops the long-term trust and long-term engagement, and the outcome is also better from there. So that is my identification of gaps in the collaboration modality. And then I will also quickly highlight the opportunities. As Arvind and others very nicely presented, we are facing so many challenges. Me too, I fully believe that this global change processes, whether it is migration or it is climate change or it is pandemics or it is rise and fall of the new power and old power, or it is in the geostrategic priority shift, whatever we count, there is a clear challenges emerging. And these challenges needs new way of thinking and a new way of action. And what does new way? It's a very jargonistic type of the word, but new way means engaging the real stakeholder, who they are. If someone from Europe comes to give the solution to the problem in the ice melt of Mount Everest, it doesn't work. If someone comes to settle the household level dispute in some local community from the European anthropologist, it will not work. What it works? Come and engage with the local stakeholders and partners. At that time, it works. Whether it is the Western Europe and Eastern Europe, or whether it is the Africa and Europe, wherever it is, the first and foremost condition we need to think to address the new challenges is to engage with the key stakeholder with whom we work. It is even within the South-South collaboration, it is very pertinent. And also the regional need are changing, the regional priority are changing. For example, the South Asia is one of the fundamentally transforming region in the world in terms of demography, in terms of climate risk, in terms of geopolitics, in terms of the nuclear power struggle between India and Pakistan. And in so many issues, South Asia is not like the 20 years or 30 years back. The SAARC is not functioning properly, which we were envisioning at the beginning that this will be the good forum like the European Union, but now European Union also started some questioning. But anyway, so what I'm saying, the need is changing, and analyzing these needs requires the new tool. The new tool means the new thinking. That is how I saw that means we have to specialize in the particular area and engage with them and work in the consortium. I always believe that we have to work on the consortium, we have to work with the collaboration, and only it works. So the consortium brings diverse knowledge, diverse experiences, and sometimes it is difficult, but wherever feasible, concerted action requires the collaborative action and collaborative approach. And therefore, I believe that this sort of collaboration is needed between the state to state think tank, state to non-state think tank, non-state to non-state think tank, universities and research center. The bit of different type of the operational modality we can observe between the think tank and the state university, that is obvious. But now university also need to think to this getting solution of the contemporary problem. And only focusing to the fundamental issue may not be sufficient for the university. In that line, I also think that university needs to rethink and reorient and give equal importance to solving the problem as well. It's not only generating knowledge for understanding, but also the generating knowledge for understanding and understanding for action and action for improvement. So there the university also needs to do. These are, so in that sense, there is tremendous opportunity between the region to region, between the north to and south, within the country and within the institution or between the institution. So these are the challenges we have to address, and this challenges is, in other words, its opportunity. Finally, I also see a few risks, because Arvind was earlier indicating some of them, that they still the dominant approach is that money determines the priority, money determines the collaboration, and money determines the outcome. And if we still continue to that approach, it will not work. And now dynamics is really changing, and therefore all the think tank wants to contribute to this global challenges which we are facing now needs to rethink. In terms of knowledge asymmetry, in terms of institutional capacity asymmetry, in terms of understanding asymmetry, we need to change. So these and the biases and alignment is also always danger. I was very clearly listening to Arvind. He was telling that there is a very clear possibility. It was existed, it will exist in the future. But that we try to minimize that if we want to really solve the problem. For example, if we want to solve the migration problem in South Asia, we have to work together. Many countries which are different, for example, India and Pakistan, they are different in many political stands, but the social stand is still we have to work and collaborate. For example, Nepal and Bhutan, Nepal and Bangladesh, all we have to work together to settle some of the issues which are really omnipresent and affects to one country to another. So that is my final word, that we have to collaborate based on the mutual respect, mutual understanding, and common problem. It is possible, but we need to change the existing approach. Thank you very much. If there are any points to elaborate, I am very happy to elaborate.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vishnu sir, for your remarks. And you especially, I think, emphasize on the imperative of having mutual interest and collaborations in order to have the real policy impact. So thank you very much. Now, I think we don't have any questions in our chat box. So what we can do is we can have like 2 to 3 minute closing statement from each of our panelists once again. So may I start with Wayner, sir?
Okay. Yeah, if I look to try to look once again to the European South Asian relationship, I would say, if I compare the relationship between EU and European nations with India and South Asia as a whole, I would say compared to Western Asia, to East Asia, to Southeast Asia, and to Central Asia. This used to be a neglected area. So far, South Asian region needs more progress in contacts than all the other regions. I mean, if you look back to relationships between European think tanks and East Asian think tanks, there's a lot, even with Southeast Asians. Of course, Europe is occupying itself with Western Asia, with the so-called Middle East, and with Central Asia, but South Asia was more or less left to the British due to history and think tanks all over Europe, whether this was in France or in Germany or in all the other countries, did not care so much, did not occupy themselves as much as it was necessary. And what I think there are 3 factors that bring quite a big change. The one is, of course, is Brexit. The British cannot care anymore for all of European Union for South Asia. And insofar, it is one of, or let me say it this way, I use every opportunity to talk with politicians and think tankers all over Europe to indicate and to make clear that we have to concentrate much, much more on South Asia. This is one fact. The second one is, for the first time, the European Commission has named itself a geopolitical commission. Of course, between words and deeds, there is sometimes a little bit difference. But I guess that von der Leyen, just also from her background and from her personal relations, will be more open-minded to the developments all over the world than all the others. Also, why? Because, you know, there is a need to do it. And as I said, you know, just the competition between America and China, of course, forces everybody to redefine its own role. And this also would mean that Europeans and South Asians who do have somehow similar situations have to cooperate more and also to have a much, much stronger dialogue. That's what I see. So far, I'm absolutely convinced that there will be an intensification of relationships between states, also in economy, between businessmen, and especially also between academics and institutions like think tanks. I'm absolutely convinced about that, because what you have to see, that in the center of the central region, the central region is, for me, as I said, the Indo-Pacific, and the geographic center is South India, and nobody can dominate the Indo-Pacific region without concentrating on South Asia. That's what I see, and therefore there will be more or less a contest. Okay, and there's another reason that I see is also, you know, that due to the rise of China and also the changing situation with Trump's America, brought also a new definitions or a new need for definitions of strategy. If you look back, 15 years ago, Europe defined its own relationship with China in a way. China is a strategic partner. Now, the relationship is defined by 3 dimensions. China is a strategic partner, for example, in climate politics, is a competitor in economy, and it is a systemic rival if there's the question about democracy on the one hand and authoritarian governments and regimes at the other side. And so far, we are forced, you know, to redefine also the relationships and to go deeper into the agenda and try to find out what is the relationship. This is not just a one overall relationship with a country or with a big actor, but we have to define it much, much more than we did in the past. And if you want to do it, of course, you have to go deeper. And this also would mean that you have to have more dialogue, to have more research, to try to find out more and better what are the circumstances and the developments. And insofar, I'm absolutely convinced, and this is what we try from our institute, you know, maybe a little bit as a trendsetter in Europe, just to establish relations also with the South Asian region. We participate every year at the Raisina Dialogue. We have relations with Pakistan, with Sri Lanka, with other countries. So far, this is not limited, but we try, you know, we are not only in India, but we also go to China and have relations over there and try to find out what are the real politics, what is behind it in order to develop the right strategy for our country and for European Union. And maybe let me make just a few remarks also to the function of think tanks. I used to say, if you compare think tanks with state institutions, you can say they are wider or broader, they are faster, and they are more explicit, they are franker, if you want to call it this way. What do I mean? We are only, usually also in Europe, have rather small think tanks. But private think tanks, even if they are sponsored by the state, they have many more opportunities to act, and therefore to act wider and broader than ministerial institutions, because of course they can include people from everywhere. And if I just look to my think tank, I have to say, okay, we have people who work for us from different nations, not only from Austria, but from different European countries, even people who have lived in South Asia for some time. This is one thing. But we also cooperate with generals, with diplomats, with professors from outside to a very large extent. And therefore, even with small budgets, we can do a lot of work that a ministerial institution cannot do. We are much faster because having such a broad view, we sense new developments, tendencies earlier than others. And we also can work faster because nobody needs 10 signatures in order to do something. He does not need the allowance from a state institution to act in a certain research way. And of course, we are much freer in our language, and therefore frankness, openness, directness is one of the characteristics that we can deliver in a better way than state institutions usually can. And insofar, I'm sure that the outcome, the products we do have, really, I do not want to laud it too much, they can meet the results of other institutions to quite some extent, I would say, And what I want to say in this way also, I think, that this exchange of experiences from institution to institution in Europe and also in South Asia probably will be very valuable. Of course, you have different conditions. We have to look at that, but we will find out there are many, many common questions. And one of these common questions that I want to go back is that we have a global competition between America and China for the next few decades. And Europe has to find its place in this game, and South Asia has to find its place in this game. And insofar, both regions not having the same capacities at the moment as America and China at this time, we have to try also to find our role, to find our place, and to develop strategies in order to reach these positions we want to have in the future. Because of course, our intention is not just to be, I don't know, in the second category, but we want to sit at the table, at the number one table. Let me formulate it this way. And that's what we will try to do. Of course, we will not forget our ideological links to the Americans. We do not forget at the other side also the economic importance of China. But the most important thing is, of course, to find our own way and our own role in this global competition. And I'm sure we will do it. Just establishing networks within Europe, and on the other hand, also networks with other partners or with partners outside Europe, and especially in South Asia. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Now I'd like to request Arvind sir for your brief final thoughts.
Thank you very much. This has been very informative, what has been spoken about by our colleagues from Europe. I just want to focus on 2 or 3 things because there's not enough time. One is it was mentioned that we need to look at Eurasia, OBOR, and Indo-Pacific. I think that's a very interesting way of putting things, establishing interconnections between 3 major geostrategic projects. So we should certainly pursue this agenda in our think tank discussions. And it's very interesting to see that the European countries are now coming up with their Indo-Pacific strategies. France has done that. Germany has done that. And I think Britain also has something. So we have been at our think tank, we have been looking at these interconnections, and maybe there would be time for us to discuss it sometimes in the future. For India, from Indian point of view, I think what happens in Europe is extremely important, and we have always been interested in Europe. After all, India, we had the 3 major colonial powers, Portugal, and then the French and the British. They wrote our destiny for a number of centuries. And this is the time now to perhaps have another round of interactions, but maybe very different interaction. So we are interested. And with Poland, for instance, as a part of, when you were part of the Soviet universe, there were very close connections. Even now, there are actually quite close connections. I myself have visited Poland a number of times for interactions. But we'll certainly like to improve our connectivity, as you put it, between the think tanks. So we'll be happy to have your suggestions on this one. I think the important point that needs to be understood is that, yes, it will be a disaster for the world if it becomes a G2 world, which is just the US and China. This is a multipolar world, no doubt. There are other countries, other power centers, regional institutions, which are very important. But it is also a fact that US and China competition will shape many of these, the world. So it is important that between India, which is also a important country in the Indo-Pacific and also in South Asia, and the countries of Europe, what kind of interaction we can have and collaborations we can have. India and EU, for instance, been trying to reach a free trade agreement or comprehensive economic partnership, but which we have not succeeded. I think that's something which is very important. Last summit, that 2017 summit, India and European Union talked about maritime cooperation, where we are on that. And I think Europe has interest in things like culture, which is not so much there in America, for instance. And India and the European Union, there is a very long cultural contact or connect. So I think that is something that we can also explore. And finally, I agree with Vishnu or Preeti. He made some fantastic points which kind of gel with my thinking. And we should have a consortium of think tanks within South Asia. And that will enhance our not only mutual understanding, but also enhance the importance of South Asia in the eyes of Europe or somewhere else. Right now, it is one-on-one dealing. And as you very clearly said, it's project-based, it is very episodic, and it's mostly event management, nothing more than that. So how do we, amongst the SAARC countries, we should certainly, within think tanks, we should have these think tank forums and their mutual trust and mutual respect should be no problem in South Asian context. So I think you made some wonderful points, and I want to thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Now I'd like to request Dr. Margajata Madam for your final take. Please unmute yourself.
I'm saying because our time is almost over, so I will just mention two things, not to repeating what the colleagues, our colleagues are saying, because I generally agree. First is that a very important angle between Europe and European Union countries and Southeast Asia, especially India, will be about this dilemma we have, how to defend democracies towards authoritarian regimes. Because this is something we are facing now, that, you know, authoritarian regimes, even China, comment on democracies, that democracies don't work well. This is something we've heard during pandemic in 2020 from the Chinese diplomats, even, that they commented situation in France, they commented situation in Germany, and the statement was, okay, democracies, it's not a good system. So to us, it is a big challenge to defend it and to prove that it works. It was neither, because as you could see what is happening in the US, this is the question also for the Americans. But in this angle, you know, the difference between Southeast Asia and India and China is very, very visible. And of course, it makes the cooperation between us very precious. That's one. And second is security. It's not only about sharing views on the conventional security matters. And of course, counterterrorism, which is also a very important thing, more and more important for Europe, and Southeast Asian countries have a lot of experience in that. But it's also about new approach to the term security, because we have new phenomena, at least new for the international law, which is information wars, which we are in the middle of it. We are in a status of war. It's not only Russia, now we have new players like China, Venezuela, Iran. Then we have hybrid wars. That's what is happening, what happened in Ukraine. And then also we have new phenomena in new technologies. The new technologies bring us fake news, deep fake, and all these new reality in virtual world, which brings especially democracies into a limit, you know, into really a question to where this will lead us, because our societies, even, you know, educated people are not realizing how much impact it can have. Discussion about the future of Facebook, Twitter, and about the reaction on Donald Trump, if they had right to block his accounts, etc. So these all new things are extremely important for the future of our system. And I think without the think tanks and the new ideas how to really handle that, the politicians don't have answers. I would stop here.
Okay, thank you very much, madam. Now I'd like to request Dr. Vishnu sir for your final remarks.
Thank you, Shyamji. Many of the issues which we brought here needs further refining and further engagement. If we really want to move ahead with the bigger collaboration between the two regions and within the two regions, some of the issue raised here needs real further scrutiny and engagement. Two other points I would like to raise. One, already coming frequently, is the connectivity that is fundamentally important, and there we need to look further, engage further, and work further. The second, for me, the fundamental point which we were not engaged much was the widening gap between the rich and poor and its consequences into the security, into the demography, into the whole political system. When we are talking about the extremists are coming, when talking about the rightists are coming, why? How they are coming? If we'll go and look to the root causes, and the few billionaires control the state resources, power and politics, and then obviously it comes. So the role of the think tank, the role of the reformist democratic forces is to minimize this widening gap between the rich and poor. if the state resources are captured by very few, and then others are striving and dying from hunger, who will keep quiet? Of course they will. And then it's very easy to manipulate this type of the storm mind, and then of course it goes otherwise. The fundamental understanding of the powerful world, of the powerful people with the knowledge influence, they need to critically look to minimize the gap between rich and poor. Otherwise, forget it. It will not happen. All the issue which we are raising, China, India, America, whatever we are talking, it may not work. So one of the focuses of the think tank has to be there. I stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. So I think with this, we need to end this plenary session here. So I would like to express very sincere gratitude to all of our distinguished panelists for your valuable interventions, and on the behalf of BIDA and SADF. So hopefully in 2020 we'll be able to meet physically and exchange our ideas and views similar to this platform, very openly and candidly. So once again, thank you very much for your time and interventions.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All the best.
All the best. Bye.
Thank you.